So recently, Sean Hannity did an interview with Ainsley Earhart on her show called Bible Study. I believe it's a show on Fox Business Channel. Honestly, I haven't watched TV in about a year, other than a few movies. My wife downloaded for me. Irishman was the last one I watched. Great movie. But if you haven't noticed with my videos, I'm not really high-tech and computer savvy. So about a year ago, we got rid of cable with this great idea. We get all these free apps, download them, and watch everything I was watching on cable for free. I get so frustrated trying to download, upload, sideload these apps. I just started reading more and get my news online. Anything I need newsy, I can just Google and get online. So I haven't seen the program, but I read about it several times, and I got bits and pieces of it on YouTube. And basically, the key part that I got was, I left the Catholic Church. This is Sean Hannity speaking. I left the Catholic Church. I'm not affiliated with the Catholic Church anymore because of institutionalized corruption. However, I feel closer to God now than I've ever felt. If you're not familiar with Sean Hannity, popular talk show host, lifelong Catholic, went to 12 years of Catholic school. But to me, this is a great example of what Bible scholars and theologians mean when they say weak Catholics become Protestants and strong Protestants become Catholic. And it's not a diss on Sean, and I'll explain what I mean by that throughout the video. Just to qualify this, I've been listening to Sean Hannity for over 20 years. Back in the day, in the 80s, I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh because there was no Fox News, and you think the news is biased now. It's always been biased. And I was smart enough to see I was getting a liberal slant on all the news reported to me, and I heard this guy on the radio giving it a conservative slant, and I was like, wow. And then a few years later, my friend said to me, wow, there's another guy on the radio almost as good as Limbaugh. Actually, he said better than Limbaugh. I think he's almost as good, Sean Hannity. So I respect this guy, and the way he digs into the news and digs into politics, and he's always proven right over and over again. I see he has the capability of finding the truth. And I'm going to explain why I think eventually he'll return back to Rome, like I did, and so many Catholics did, like Peter Crift, Francis Beckwith, Scott Hahn. If you like rock and roll, Dion DiMucci from Dion and the Belmonts. But before I get into those individuals and their stories, and Sean Hannity's stories, I want to tell you another story by a great Catholic convert, Peter Crift. He tells a story about a Jewish businessman, like, I don't know, 500-600 years ago, decided he wanted to be Catholic. So he went to his local bishop and told him. And the bishop said, praise the Lord. He said, when do you want to get baptized? Let's plan this soon. He said, well, I'm going to the Vatican, have some business there to take care of. I'll probably be there for about 14 weeks. When I come back, I'll get baptized. The bishop, knowing how corrupt the Vatican was at this time in history, got nervous and said, well, no, how about we baptize you now, and then you go do business. And the Jewish businessman said, no, business before pleasure. So he left for the Vatican. The bishop was like, wow, we're going to lose him. Once he realized how corrupt the Vatican is, he'll never want to be a Catholic. 14 weeks later, the Jewish businessman comes back to the bishop and says, I'm ready to be baptized. The bishop said, really? Did you go to the Vatican? He's like, yep. He's like, so you did business in Rome, and you still want to be Catholic? He's like, yep. He goes, how come? So the Jewish businessman said, any organization that corrupt and that dumb, if they can last 1,400 years, it's got to be from God. Because no business would last 14 weeks in that kind of a mess. And throughout histories, G.K. Chesterton and other great minds that converted from Protestantism to Catholicism actually use the hypocrisy and the corruptness of the leadership in the Catholic Church as justification for becoming Catholic. Because you see, Jesus established the Catholic Church, and he said that he would not let the gates of hell prevail against it. Jesus also said there'll be sinners and saints, the wheat and the chaff, and he won't separate them till the end. So there'll always be sinners in the church. That's another proof that you're in the true church. You know, it's like Protestant Steve Brown used to say, if you find the perfect church, don't stay because you'll ruin it. That goes even more so for the Catholic Church. There's going to be saints and there's going to be sinners. There's going to be saintly popes and there's going to be sinner popes. But the Catholic Church has prevailed for 2,000 years. Only God could do that. Just think about that. So even when these popes were doing crazy things, evil things, you know, when popes were killing popes, they never made a doctrine saying popes can kill popes. When they were committing adultery, they never made a doctrine saying it was okay to commit adultery. They always kept the doctrines pure. And even Protestants follow our doctrines, like the doctrine of the Trinity that was established at the Council of Nicaea. And we say the Nicene Creed since 325 AD in the Catholic Church. And all Protestants agree with that. The Apostle Creed, all Protestants agree with that. So the Church, supernaturally, in spite of corruption, has maintained the truth that Jesus gave the apostles and the apostles passed down through apostolic succession. And many of us, when we were young in the Catholic Church, were kind of lukewarm Catholics and sought God and left the church because we didn't understand Catholic doctrine very well. We were weak in our faith, and that's what I mean by weak Catholics. And then once we got deep into the Bible and deep into church history, we realized, wow, Jesus did establish the Catholic Church, and we went back. Francis Beckwith realized this when he was the president of the Evangelical Theological Society. He was one of the top evangelical Bible scholars and realized that and went back to the Catholic Church that he grew up in. And he writes in his book that he had such horrible catechism, you know, growing up, that he didn't know the faith. Scott Hahn is another one. Check out these guys' conversion stories if you haven't already. And like I was saying earlier, Dion DiMucci, who I can relate to more than these Bible scholars, because he was just a regular blue-collar kid from New York, and I was across the Hudson in Jersey, but very similar upbringings. And he said, you know, when he got excited about God and became a born-again Christian, you know, he grew in the faith. And then he had moved to a different state and went to a different church, and the Protestant church that he grew up, he got saved in, taught that you could lose your salvation. And then he went to another church, like, no, you can't lose your salvation. And then he realized there's over 32,000 Protestant denominations, and they're all over the map in their doctrines. And he was like, wow, this is why God established one church, because Jesus wanted unity. His last prayer before he was crucified was, Father, let them be one as we are one. So if you love Jesus, you want to be one with your brothers and sisters. You want to belong to one church. And you want to belong to the church that Christ established. And in all these other churches, they don't give you the Eucharist. This is the most important doctrine of the church. And I've met a lot of evangelicals who left the Catholic Church that they don't even understand that. They think when they're getting communion, they're getting the body, blood of Christ. And I say, ask your pastor. This is just symbolic. And you'd be surprised at how many, and that's how I know they were weak Catholics. Because they didn't even know that about the Eucharist. And they don't even realize that in order for that Eucharist to be valid, it has to be administered by a priest who can show his apostolic succession all the way back to the original apostles. And the Catholic Church is the only church that can do that, as well as the Orthodox Church, Greek, Russian, so I stand corrected. But they believe all the doctrines we do. They just don't recognize our popes. They have patriarchs. That's the only difference. That's why in certain situations we can have their Eucharist and they can have ours. So if Sean is leaving because of institutional corruption, which I admit there is, and I believe Pope Francis is trying to fight it, but it's a hard battle for one man. He's not going to find any Protestant church that doesn't have some level of corruption, and the bigger the church, there's going to be more corruption. You know, I read it in the news all the time, different churches where there's corruption. So what I think's happening with Sean, he was surrounded by so many evangelicals, because he's a conservative, as myself, and in the conservative circles, there's a lot of evangelicals, and they're very influential. And Ainsley Earhart, I hear all the time on the Brian Kilmeade show, she's a very sincere Christian, and very intelligent. I think she's a lawyer, very intelligent woman, and I'm sure he's surrounded by people like that. And listened to him years and years, I've always respected his political views, but whenever he talked about the Bible or talked about the Catholic faith, I realized this guy is not much of a theologian. He doesn't know his faith well. I mean, for 20 years, I've always winced when he tried to talk about God. I'm like, you need to stick to politics or learn a little bit more about God. And so this is what I mean when I say we Catholics become Protestant and strong Protestants become Catholics. Because once you realize that the Bible is true and that the Catholic Church is the church that gave us the Bible, you realize, well, if I trust my Bible, I have to trust the Catholic Church. If I don't trust the Catholic Church, then I can't trust my Bible. And the Bible, Jesus said, "This is my body." And in the Greek, it is clear that he means, this is my body. Not like the Protestants say, this is a symbol of my body. So if you believe the Bible, and the only place to get his body and blood is the Catholic Church, why would you leave? How could you leave? No matter how bad the church gets, where else can you go? There's nowhere else to go. Just like when in John, Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 66, after he told his disciples that unless you eat my body and drink my blood, and again in the Greek it's clear, he's talking about his physical body and his blood. When he said this, Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 66, 666, it said many of his followers left him. They left him. Just like today, many people will not accept that he meant that. They say, oh, it was just symbolic. But you can't get that from the Bible. That's man's theology. That's man's teaching. That, even Martin Luther didn't believe that. That didn't come about in Protestantism till Zwingli. Google that, Sean Hannity. So you're following teachings of men. Okay? And then after his followers left, he asked Peter, are you too going to leave me? And Peter's like, where else can I go? And that's what I say to you, my Catholics. No matter how bad the church gets, where else can you go? We need the body and blood of Christ. That's the greatest gift he's given the church. The greatest gift he's given you and me to restore our souls. So I pray for Sean Hannity that he uses his intelligence, because he's a very intelligent man, and he uses all his resources, just like he found out about the Russian hoax and the Ukraine scandal, and he was talking about Hunter Biden years ago before anybody was talking about Hunter Biden. If he uses that knowledge and that go-to into his faith, there's no doubt that we'll be reading about him coming back to Rome in a couple of years. But pray for him, because Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven than it is for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. He has a lot of distractions. He's a very rich man. Although he grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood like me and from blue-collar roots, and he's done blue-collar jobs, he did sheetrock, he was a dishwasher, he's always worked. That's why he has my respect, and for many other reasons. He became rich. And so he has a lot of distractions. And some people see it as a blessing, but sometimes it's a curse if it keeps you from the truth. Now, he does profess he still loves God. He's a Christian. He doesn't say if he goes to church or what church he goes to in any of your interviews I see. So, pray for him that he sees the truth. And in my own life, I grew up in a blue-collar inner city. Everybody was Catholic. He was Irish Catholic. I was Italian and Irish and Catholic. Everybody that was Italian or Irish and Italian were Catholic. It's just the way it was. But we really didn't practice our faith. We really didn't know our faith. When we went to catechism, there were these liberal teachers who didn't believe the faith either. They really didn't give you the meat that they give you today in RCIA, in faith formation. So a lot of us got poorly catechized. So when we learned from evangelicals about the Bible, we got excited and we left the church. And that's where I think Sean is. Unfortunately, Sean got riches before he got able to go back. Okay, where he's at now at 57 years old, I was at 19, and then it took me till I was about 49 or 50 to come back to the Catholic Church. So I pray it doesn't take him that long to come back, since it took him that long to leave and really seek God and think the Catholic Church didn't have what he needed. And I thank God that he spoke to me at a young age, because I did grow up in the inner city, and I dropped out of high school in 9th grade, but I was able to go in the Navy because Ronald Reagan wanted a 500-ship Navy, so they were making exemptions for high school dropouts who could double the ASVAB. And, you know, I read a lot on my own. I'm very good at teaching myself. A lot of people call me a self-taught scholar, which I'm not, the blue-collar scholar, but I do not say that. Far from it. When I read guys like Peter Crift, sometimes my head spins. I have to read it 3 times to understand what he's saying. So, but I do read a lot. And when I was in the Navy, my lieutenant offered me a scholarship. Basically, the Navy offered me a scholarship, and it was proved. It was proved by a high-ranking admiral based on my history. It was called the Boost Program. It was for economically challenged kids who never went to college. Basically, poor kids who dropped out of high schools, but they were smart enough to go to college. And they would send you to like a 1 year intense school to prepare you for Annapolis, the Naval Academy. And I could have went to the Naval Academy, got a degree, and then I just had to give a 6-year commitment with the Navy. So in all, it would have been like 11 years I would have had to commit. And I was fully qualified. I passed everything. And then at one point, they realized that I was married, and they said, you cannot attend the academy being married. So this is what you need to do. You need to divorce your wife, but, you know, stay together. But on paper, you'll be divorced, and then just remarry her when you get out. And I thought to myself, wow, if I went to the Naval Academy, the sky's the limit. And I just started thinking. And at a very young age, as a teenager, I had a grasp of politics. I knew how to debate, and I knew rhetoric. And I could always win arguments. I was like, wow, I go into politics, and I could be governor, I could be president. My head just kept getting bigger and bigger. And then a small voice, felt like the Holy Spirit said to me, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world if he loses his soul? And I stepped back and I thought, even on paper, if I divorce my wife, that's not right. Would God want me to divorce my wife so I can be better? And so I put God first. And I don't always put God first. I'm not perfect, trust me. Many times I look back, I didn't put God, I put my ego first, and I paid for it. But this time I put God first, and it was the greatest decision I made. I have married to the same woman 34 years. I have 5 kids who love the Lord. 3 of them are Catholic. 2 of them are evangelicals, but they all were baptized and they all love the Lord. And me and my wife will be together forever. And to me, they're the 2 greatest things I could ask for. Riches and all that. You know, what good would they do if I lost my soul? So, I'm not saying Sean was selfish or anything. I'm just saying when you have riches, it's harder to seek the truth. And Evel Knievel, the motorcycle guy, if you remember him back in the day, I used to have one of those things you pull, the little motorcycle, and it had an Evel Knievel figure on it, and he would jump ramps. It was like my favorite toy. They asked him in an interview, how did you become so famous? Before you, that was just like a carnival act. People get paid $50 to jump over a few cars. You made it into $1 billion industry, literally $1 billion industry. And he said, honestly, the only way anyone gets to the top in any field, whether it be sports, business, entertainment, is to be selfish. He said, I was a horrible father. I was a horrible husband. It was all about me. Arnold Schwarzenegger said the same thing in Pumping Iron, if you've ever seen that movie. He said, to get to my level in my sport, you have to be selfish. His mother called him during he was training for Mr. Universe. And his mother said, your dad died. She goes, I need you. She's crying. I need you to come home. And he hung up on her. He said, I couldn't. He said, I had to win Mr. Universe. I didn't think about it. He said, you got to be selfish. He won Mr. Universe. Then he went back home and grieved with his mother. But what does it profit a man to gain the whole world, Mr. Universe, greatest motorcycle jumper ever, if you lose your own soul? So this is what a lot of these rich people are dealing with. And I feel sorry for them. I don't envy their money. I don't envy their success. And just the sense of listening to Sean for 20-something years, I realized He wants to seek the truth, and he will. And he's smart enough to figure it out and come back to Rome, come back to being Catholic. So that's my take on Sean Hannity renouncing the Catholic religion and losing his faith. And for what it's worth, stay Catholic. God bless. Subscribe if you like my channel. Like this if you like it. Dislike it if you don't. And be making another video soon.